In a quiet neighborhood, two families lived side by side. The Adesinas and the Balogans had been friends for years, sharing meals, laughter, and memories. The mothers, Mrs. Adesina and Mrs. Balogan, were inseparable. They grew up in the same village, attended the same schools, and even got married around the same time. Their bond was unshakable, and their closeness extended to their children. Ruth Adesina and David Balogan were both 12 years old. They had grown up together like siblings, spending countless hours playing, studying, and sharing secrets. Everyone in the neighborhood knew them as a duo. If you saw David, Ruth wasn't far behind. Despite their closeness, the two families couldn't be more different. The Adesinas believed in strict rules and discipline. Mr. and Mrs. Adesina made sure Ruth focused on her studies, spent minimal time watching TV, and avoided unnecessary distractions like smartphones. On the other hand, the Balogans were more relaxed. They believed children should explore the world and learn through their own experiences. David had plenty of freedom, and his parents trusted him to make the right decisions. He already had a tablet, access to the internet, and now, after scoring top marks in school, he was given a smartphone as a reward. When David showed Ruth his new phone, her eyes lit up with excitement. "Wow, it's so cool," she said, holding it carefully as if it were a treasure. "You're so lucky. My parents would never let me have one." David grinned. "It's awesome, Ruth. Look, it has games, videos, and even social media. You can try it if you want." Ruth hesitated. She knew her parents wouldn't approve, but her curiosity got the better of her. "Maybe just for a minute," she said, glancing over her shoulder to make sure her mother wasn't nearby. As the two sat together exploring the phone, Mrs. Balogan walked into the room. She smiled warmly at the sight of the children sharing a moment. "Ruth, you're always welcome here," she said. "Feel free to use David's phone anytime." Ruth thanked her politely, but deep down, she felt a tug of guilt. She knew her parents wouldn't be happy about her using a smartphone, even if it wasn't her own. The Adesinas and Balogans had always respected each other's parenting styles, but they rarely discussed their differences. Both mothers trusted their children and believed in their bond, thinking nothing could ever come between them. But sometimes, small choices can lead to big changes. One sunny afternoon, David sat cross-legged on the couch in his living room, engrossed in his new phone. Ruth, who had come over to visit, sat beside him, watching with growing curiosity as he swiped through apps and tapped away at the screen. "What are you doing?" Ruth asked, leaning closer to see. David grinned and held up the phone. "It's social media. All my friends at school talk about it. You can post pictures, chat, and even watch funny videos. Look, there's this app where you can follow people and see what they're doing." Ruth tilted her head. "So it's like sharing everything with your friends?" "Exactly," David said. "You can also join groups. My classmates have one where we all talk. It's fun, Ruth. You'd love it." Ruth's eyes widened. The idea of staying connected with friends, sharing pictures, and being part of a group chat sounded thrilling. "That's so cool. I wish I had my own phone." David shrugged. "Why don't you ask your parents? Maybe they'll get you one." Ruth hesitated, then sighed. "They'll never agree. They think I'm too young for stuff like this. My mom is always talking about focus and discipline. She even gets upset if I watch too much TV." David tapped his chin thoughtfully. "Well, you could ask for a phone or a tablet as a birthday gift. That's how I got mine. I worked hard at school and my parents said I earned it." Ruth's face lit up. "That's a great idea. My birthday's coming up soon. If I promise to get good grades and help around the house, maybe they'll agree." That evening at home, Ruth approached her mother with a hopeful expression. "Mom," she began, "I've been thinking about what I want for my birthday." Mrs. Adesina set down the book she was reading and smiled. "And what would that be, Ruth?" "I want a phone," Ruth said, her voice steady but full of anticipation. "Or maybe a tablet, something I can use for school and to talk to my friends." The smile on her mother's face disappeared. "A phone," she repeated, her tone sharp. "You're too young for that kind of distraction." "But Mom—" "No, Ruth," her mother interrupted. "You don't need a phone. You should focus on your studies and the important things in life. Phones can wait." Ruth felt her chest tighten. "But David has one, and he's my age. He uses it for school too. David's family has their way of doing things. Mrs. Adesina replied firmly. "We have ours. I won't let you lose focus because of unnecessary distractions." Over the next few days, Ruth couldn't stop thinking about her conversation with her mother. When she visited David again, she told him what had happened. "My mom said no," Ruth said, slumping onto the couch. "She thinks I'll get distracted." David frowned. "That's not fair. You're not asking for much, it's just a phone." Ruth sighed. "She doesn't understand. She thinks I'm still a kid." David nodded sympathetically. Then his face brightened. "Hey, I can show you how to use my phone. You don't need your own to learn. Come on, I'll show you some apps and cool stuff." Ruth hesitated. "Are you sure? What if my parents get upset?" David waved off her concern. "It's fine. They trust me. Besides, we're best friends. I want you to see how fun it is." With that, David handed Ruth his phone and walked her through the basics. How to use apps, browse the internet, and join group chats. Ruth's face lit up as she learned, her curiosity growing with every new discovery. David introduced her to his classmates' group chat, where they shared jokes, memes, and updates about school. It felt like a whole new world opening up before her. That night, as Ruth sat at the dinner table with her parents, her mother's voice pulled her back to reality. "Ruth, I hope you've been keeping up with your studies," Mrs. Adesina said, her tone serious. "Remember what I told you about distractions?" Ruth nodded, but she couldn't help feeling frustrated. She wanted to tell her mother about everything David had shown her, the apps, the chats, the excitement of connecting with friends, but she knew it would only lead to another lecture. As she cleared the dishes, Ruth found herself torn between her desire to explore the digital world and her mother's strict rules. It had been a few weeks since David had started showing Ruth the world of apps and social media. By now, she was familiar with the basics, scrolling through posts, joining group chats, and even commenting on funny memes. One day, as David handed her the phone, a new message popped up in the chat. It wasn't the usual jokes or funny pictures. This time, an older student in the group sent a link, followed by laughing emojis. "Check this out," the message read. Ruth clicked on the link out of curiosity, and a strange video began to play. The content wasn't like anything she'd seen before. It was adult and confusing, yet there was something about it that intrigued her. She looked at David, whose face had turned pale. "Should we be watching this?" David asked nervously. "It's just a video," Ruth said, brushing off his concern. "Everyone else in the group seems to think it's interesting. Besides, we're not doing anything wrong." David frowned. "It feels wrong, Ruth. Maybe we shouldn't stay in this chat." Ruth shook her head. "Don't be such a baby, David. It's not a big deal. We just don't tell anyone, okay? It's our little secret." David hesitated, unsure of what to say. He trusted Ruth, and her confidence made him doubt his own feelings. "Okay," he finally said. "But we shouldn't watch stuff like this too often." "Agreed," Ruth replied, smiling. But deep down, the curiosity still lingered in her mind. The following afternoon, Ruth and David found themselves alone at David's house. His parents had gone out to work, leaving them to play or study together as they often did. But today felt different. The strange videos they had seen the day before lingered in Ruth's thoughts. As they sat in the living room, Ruth leaned closer to David. "Do you ever wonder what it feels like?" David looked at her, confused. "What feels like?" "You know," Ruth said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "What those people were doing in the videos. They looked like they were having fun." David's face turned red. "Ruth, that's not something we should talk about." "Why not?" Ruth challenged. "We've already seen it. What's the harm in trying to see what it's like? No one's home. No one will know." David hesitated, his stomach twisting in knots. "I don't think it's a good idea." Ruth leaned in, her voice soft but insistent. "Come on, David. Don't you want to know? Just once, to see how it feels." David swallowed hard, torn between his hesitation and Ruth's growing enthusiasm. After a long pause, he nodded reluctantly. "Okay. But just once." They went into the bedroom and nervously attempted to mimic what they had seen. The atmosphere in the room grew tense. It wasn't fun or exciting like Ruth had imagined. Instead, it felt strange, awkward, and uncomfortable. David's hands trembled, and his face was flushed with embarrassment. Suddenly, Ruth pushed him away, her voice rising in panic. "Stop! I can't do this anymore. It feels painful." David immediately stepped back, his heart pounding. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Ruth nodded, but tears filled her eyes. "I'm sorry, David. I thought it would be different. I didn't think it would feel this bad." David sat beside her, his own guilt weighing heavily on his shoulders. "It's okay, Ruth. We shouldn't have done this. Let's promise not to do anything like this again." Ruth wiped her eyes and nodded. "Promise." The two sat in silence for a long time, the weight of their decision pressing down on them. What had started as innocent curiosity had quickly spiraled into something far more complicated and unsettling. The group chat had become a central part of Ruth and David's lives. What began as an exciting novelty had slowly taken over their time and attention. They would sit for hours in David's room scrolling through videos and laughing at memes. But not all the content was innocent. The older kids in the group kept sharing videos and pictures that were confusing, strange, and often inappropriate. Ruth and David, curious and intrigued, continued watching. David, especially, found himself drawn to the videos. At night, after his parents went to bed, he would grab his phone and scroll through the group chat alone. His curiosity had grown stronger, and he couldn't stop thinking about the things he didn't fully understand. The videos seemed fascinating, and he convinced himself that it wasn't harmful as long as no one found out. Whenever Ruth came over, David eagerly showed her what he had discovered. They would sit together, huddled over the phone, whispering and giggling. But sometimes, the content left them with more questions than answers. "We don't even understand what's happening in some of these videos," Ruth said one afternoon. "The last time we tried it was painful, but they looked so happy in these videos. Maybe we should just ask our moms." David froze, looking up from the phone. "Are you serious? You think we should tell them?" "Why not?" Ruth said. "They're adults. They'll know. And maybe they can explain why this stuff feels so weird." David shook his head firmly. "No way. They won't understand, Ruth. They'll just think we're doing something wrong and get mad. Do you want to get in trouble?" Ruth hesitated, then shook her head. "No, I guess not." "Exactly," David said, turning back to the phone. "Besides, these videos are interesting. Don't you want to keep watching?" Ruth bit her lip. Deep down she felt uneasy, but her curiosity was too strong to resist. "Okay," she said quietly, "but just a little longer." Over time, the children's behavior began to shift in noticeable ways. Ruth, who had always been cheerful and eager to help around the house, started staying up late and lying about her activities. When her mother asked what she had been doing, Ruth would shrug and mumble something about studying, but the truth was far from that. David, too, had changed. He no longer played outside or did homework with Ruth. Instead, he spent hours alone in his room, glued to his phone. Whenever Ruth came over, they would disappear into his room and spend the entire afternoon scrolling through the group chat. Homework, games, and outdoor activities became distant memories. The mothers began to notice the changes, but they didn't think much of it. "They're growing up," Mrs. Balogan said one evening, as she and Mrs. Adesina sat in the kitchen chatting over tea. "You know how preteens are. They get moody and distant." "It's normal." "I suppose so," Mrs. Adesina replied, though a flicker of doubt crossed her mind. Ruth had been more secretive lately, and it was starting to worry her, but she didn't want to make a big deal out of it. David's mother, too, began to notice the change in her son. He was more distracted, more secretive, and often seemed lost in his own world. When she asked him what was wrong, he would shrug and say, "Nothing, Mom." One evening, as she passed his room, she noticed the faint glow of his phone screen through the crack in the door. "David, are you still awake?" she called. The screen turned off immediately. "I'm going to sleep, Mom," he said quickly. Mrs. Balogan frowned but didn't press the issue. "Preteen mood swings," she muttered to herself as she walked away. Ruth and David's obsession with the group chat and the videos began to create a rift between them and their families. The once lively afternoons spent playing outside or doing homework together were gone, replaced by hushed whispers and hours spent scrolling on the phone. Even their bond with each other was changing. While they still shared everything, There was an unspoken tension growing between them. Ruth, who had always been bold and curious, started feeling uneasy about the path they were on, but she didn't know how to stop. David, on the other hand, was too intrigued to care. The allure of the forbidden videos was too strong, and he couldn't bring himself to give them up. Whenever Ruth expressed doubts, he would dismiss her concerns with a wave of his hand. "It's fine, Ruth. We're not doing anything wrong." But deep down, both children knew that something was shifting. They just didn't know how to go back to the way things were. Their once carefree friendship now carried an invisible weight. They no longer laughed as easily or played as freely. Even when they were together, silence often filled the space where laughter once thrived. The group chat and the videos had created a growing distance between them, and both children felt it. One day, while sitting in David's room, he broke the silence. "Ruth," he said hesitantly, fiddling with the edge of a pillow, "do you think maybe if we try those things again it might help?" Ruth frowned, unsure of what he meant. "Help with what?" "You know, the weirdness between us," David said, avoiding her eyes. "It feels like we're not as close anymore. Maybe if we do what we saw in the videos, it'll bring us back to how we used to be." Ruth's chest tightened. "David, we promised we wouldn't do that again, remember? It felt wrong." David sighed. "I know, but it's not like we're doing anything bad. We're just curious, right? No one will know, it's just us." Ruth hesitated, her mind racing. She felt the same unease as before, but David's words struck a chord. The distance between them was real, and she missed the closeness they once had. Against her better judgment, her curiosity crept back in, whispering that maybe he was right. "Okay," Ruth said softly, "but just this one time." David nodded, a mix of relief and nervousness flashing across his face. The house was quiet that afternoon. David's parents had gone out, leaving the two children alone as they often did. Ruth and David sat on the bed, awkward and uncertain. They tried to mimic what they had seen in the videos, but the act felt forced, unnatural, and far from the solution they had hoped for. Suddenly, the sound of the sitting room door slamming outside broke the silence. Ruth froze, her eyes widening in panic. "David, your mom's back," she whispered urgently. Before they could move, the front door opened, and Mrs. Balogan's voice called out, "David, I'm home!" David scrambled to straighten up, but it was too late. The bedroom door swung open, and there stood his mother, her face a mix of confusion and disbelief as she took in the scene before her. "What is going on here?" she demanded, her voice sharp and shaking with anger. David stammered, unable to form a coherent response. Ruth's face turned pale, her hands trembling as she backed away from the bed. "I asked a question," Mrs. Balogan's voice rose. "What are you two doing?" After a long, tense silence, Ruth broke down in tears. "I'm sorry, Auntie," she sobbed. "It's not what you think. We were just trying something we saw." "What you saw?" Mrs. Balogan said, her brow furrowing. "What are you talking about?" David finally spoke, his voice barely audible. "It's the group chat," he said. "Some older kids sent videos and we watched them." "What videos?" his mother pressed, her tone harsh. "Explain yourselves, now." Bit by bit, the children confessed everything. The group chat, the inappropriate videos, their secret late-night sessions, and their attempts to mimic what they had seen. By the time they were done, tears streamed down both their faces. Mrs. Balogan stood still, her face a storm of emotions, shock, anger, and disappointment. "I can't believe this," she said quietly. "How could you let this happen, David, after everything we've taught you?" When Ruth returned home that evening, her mother was already waiting. Mrs. Balogan explained what had happened. As soon as she finished, Mrs. Adesina's face turned red with fury. "This is unacceptable!" Mrs. Adesina exclaimed, turning to Ruth. "How could you, after everything I've done to raise you right?" "I'm sorry, Mom," Ruth whispered, her voice cracking. "Sorry isn't enough," her mother snapped. She turned to Mrs. Balogan. "This is exactly why I've been so strict. Your lax parenting has corrupted my daughter." "Excuse me?" Mrs. Balogan shot back, her tone defensive. "Don't blame my son for your daughter's choices. They both made mistakes. My daughter wouldn't have even known about these things if it weren't for David and his phone," Mrs. Adesina retorted. And maybe if you weren't so controlling, Ruth wouldn't feel the need to rebel, Mrs. Balogun fired back. The argument escalated, the two mothers raising their voices as they defended their children. Meanwhile, Ruth and David sat silently, the weight of their actions sinking in deeper with every passing second. Eventually, the mothers calmed down, agreeing to address the issue together. They confiscated David's phone, but the damage had already been done. Ruth and David's friendship, once so pure and strong, now felt fragile and strained. For the first time, the children truly understood the consequences of their actions. They had not only hurt themselves, but also the people who loved and trusted them the most. The air was heavy in the Balogun living room as the two families sat down to talk. Ruth and David sat side by side on the couch, their heads bowed in shame. Across from them, their mothers sat in silence, their faces a mix of disappointment and exhaustion. Mr. Adesina and Mr. Balogun stood nearby, arms crossed, listening intently. Finally, it was Mrs. Adesina who broke the silence. Her voice, though firm, carried a tinge of sadness. "I've been thinking about what happened," she said, looking at Ruth. "And while I'm deeply disappointed, I also realize that maybe I share some of the blame." Mrs. Balogun glanced at her in surprise. "What do you mean?" "I've always believed in being strict with Ruth," Mrs. Adesina admitted. "I thought if I controlled her environment, she'd stay focused, avoid distractions, and grow up to be responsible. But maybe I pushed her too hard. Maybe my rules made her feel like she had to hide things from me, like she couldn't talk to me about what she was curious about." Ruth glanced up briefly, her mother's words hitting close to home. She opened her mouth to speak but quickly looked down again, silent. Mrs. Balogun sighed deeply, her expression softening. "I'm not blameless either," she said. "I've always believed in giving David freedom. I thought it was the best way for him to learn and grow on his own. But I see now that I left him unprepared. I trusted him to make good decisions without teaching him how to navigate the dangers of the world, especially online. I should have paid more attention to what he was doing." David shifted uncomfortably, his mother's words cutting through his guilt. "I think we both made mistakes," Mrs. Adesina said, her voice steady but reflective. "I was too rigid, and you were too lenient. Our children got caught in the middle." Mrs. Balogun nodded. "You're right. We both failed to recognize how curious and vulnerable they are at this age. They needed guidance, not just rules or freedom." "We should have been paying more attention," Mrs. Adesina added. "Not just to what they were doing, but to how they were feeling. Maybe if I had been more approachable, Ruth would have come to me when she didn't understand those videos. And maybe if I had set firmer boundaries," Mrs. Balogun said, "David wouldn't have been exposed to that group chat in the first place." Both women fell silent, their words hanging heavily in the room. The fathers nodded quietly, their expressions solemn. After a long pause, Mrs. Balogun spoke again. "What's done is done. We can't change the past, but we can do better moving forward." "I agree," said Mrs. Adesina. "We need to work together for their sake. They're good kids. They just need guidance." The mothers turned to Ruth and David, who were still sitting quietly on the couch. "From now on," said Mrs. Adesina, "there will be rules about phone and internet use. But there will also be conversations. We want you to feel like you can come to us with anything. No judgment, no shouting, just open communication. We'll set clear boundaries," added Mrs. Balogun. "But we'll also make sure you understand why those boundaries are there. It's not about control, it's about keeping you safe." Ruth and David looked up, their eyes wide with a mixture of relief and guilt. "We're sorry," Ruth said softly. "We didn't mean to cause so much trouble." David nodded. "We didn't think it would go this far. We just didn't know what to do." Their mothers exchanged a look and then nodded. "That's why we're here," said Mrs. Balogun. "To help you make sense of the world, even the parts that are confusing or scary." The conversation ended with hugs and promises to do better on all sides. Ruth and David felt lighter, knowing they weren't alone in facing their mistakes. Their mothers, too, felt a renewed sense of purpose, determined to guide their children with both firmness and love. As the families left the Balogun home that evening, the tension between them had eased. While the road ahead wouldn't be easy, they were committed to facing it together. The trust that had been shaken was beginning to mend, and with it, a new foundation was being built, one of understanding, balance, and hope. The following morning, Ruth and David sat quietly at the kitchen table in the Balogun household. Their parents were seated around them, their faces calm but resolute. The weight of the previous day still lingered, but today felt different, like the beginning of something new. Ruth spoke first, her voice trembling. "We're really sorry for everything we've done. We didn't mean to hurt anyone." David nodded in agreement, his head bowed. "We just got too curious. But we shouldn't have kept secrets from you." Mrs. Adesina leaned forward, her voice firm yet kind. "Ruth, curiosity is natural, but when you let it take you places you're not ready for, it can lead to trouble. That's why it's important to trust us, to come to us when you don't understand something," Mrs. Balogun added. "And David, we trusted you to use the phone responsibly, but we should have been clearer about the boundaries. Trust goes both ways. Do you both understand that?" "Yes, Mom," David said, his voice steady. "I understand now." Ruth nodded as well. "We both do. From now on," said Mr. Balogun, "there will be rules about how you use technology. You're both smart kids, but you're still too young to handle everything that comes with having your own phone." Mr. Adesina chimed in, his tone serious. "Instead, we've decided that you can use children's tablets for schoolwork and entertainment, but only in supervised areas. No private browsing, no unsupervised group chats, and your screen time will be limited." Ruth and David exchanged glances but didn't argue. They knew they had crossed a line and were grateful for this second chance. "And," added Mrs. Balogun, "we're going to have regular family discussions about what you see online. If you come across something confusing or inappropriate, you need to tell us. We're here to help you understand, not to scold you." Mrs. Adesina smiled gently at Ruth. "I know I've been strict, but I'm going to try to be more approachable. I want you to feel like you can talk to me about anything. No more hiding." Ruth's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Mom. I'll try to be honest from now on." David reached for his mother's hand. "I'm sorry for breaking your trust. I'll do better." With the rules in place, the families began a new routine. Instead of spending hours glued to screens, Ruth and David were encouraged to engage in offline activities. They played board games with their parents, cooked meals together, and even started a garden in the Balogun backyard. Every evening, both families would meet for tea, sharing stories and discussing their day. During one such gathering, Ruth hesitantly brought up a question about something she'd seen online. To her surprise, her mother listened patiently, offering advice without judgment. David followed suit, sharing his thoughts openly. These conversations, once unimaginable, became a safe space for the children to explore their curiosity with guidance. Over time, the tension between Ruth and David began to fade. Without the distractions of the group chat and the videos, they rediscovered their shared love for simple things, playing outside, solving puzzles, and even helping each other with homework. One afternoon, as they sat under the mango tree in the Balogun yard, Ruth turned to David. "I'm glad we're back to being us." David smiled. "Me too. I missed this." "Do you think things will ever go back to how they used to be?" Ruth asked. David shrugged, then grinned. "Maybe not exactly, but maybe they'll be even better." Ruth laughed, the sound light and free. For the first time in weeks, the weight on her heart felt lighter. One weekend, the families decided to host a barbecue to celebrate their renewed bond. The aroma of grilled chicken and roasted corn filled the air as the adults chatted and laughed. Ruth and David played tag with the neighborhood kids, their joy infectious. The two families gathered around a picnic table, sharing stories and dreams for the future. It was a moment of unity, a reminder that no matter what challenges they faced, they could overcome them together. Looking at the smiling faces around her, Ruth felt a surge of gratitude. She glanced at David, who gave her a knowing smile. They both understood that they were lucky, not just for the love of their families, but for the lessons they had learned. That night, as Ruth lay in bed, she thought about how much had changed. The trust her parents had shown, the support they had given, and the love they had never stopped offering, it all meant so much. She drifted off to sleep with a smile, knowing that she and David were on a better path. The families weren't perfect, but they were stronger, and that, Ruth thought, was what truly mattered.